And it's great to be back on home turf, where more folks know me as Dave or even Peaches than as General Petraeus, or maybe as the commemorative general. I've been called worse. There we were in New York City a couple of events ago, and this lovely old lady said, "General, you know, you make pretty good 4-star arm candy." And again, I do want to assure you I am staying hydrated, not to worry. So today we honor the more than 100 Purple Heart recipients among us and their comrades in arms across our great country. Individuals who have given so much, and in some cases all, for our great nation. We pay tribute, therefore, this afternoon to heroes worth honoring and to stories worth hearing. For centuries, as you heard, the Purple Heart has been a badge of courage and a symbol of sacrifice. On an August day in 1782 in this very city, and indeed at the very site of the Hall of Honor, General George Washington ordered the creation of a new award, the Badge of Military Merit. Each individual who earned the badge would be authorized to wear a purple cloth in the shape of a heart, signifying, as General Washington put it, that he has given of his blood in the defense of his homeland and shall forever be revered by his fellow countrymen. 150 years later, General Douglas MacArthur and 150 other war veterans would receive the newly revived and redesignated Purple Heart at a ceremony here, also in New Windsor, just 5 miles from where George Washington awarded the first 3 badges of military merit in 1783. From those first 3 men to Douglas MacArthur to the men and women who have earned the Purple Heart in Iraq and Afghanistan, those who wear the Purple Heart are part of a rich heritage of courage and sacrifice in service to our country, the kind of courage and sacrifice epitomized by Purple Heart recipient Sergeant Bill Stratus. A rifleman and scout in the Army's 9th Division during World War II, Sergeant Stratus took part in tough fighting in Belgium and Germany in 1945 and helped establish the critical Remagen bridgehead during a campaign in which he was wounded by enemy machine gun fire. He and his unit later pushed through the Nazi defenses at the Ruhr Pocket and then were surrounded by enemy forces. Captured and forced to walk over 100 miles with little food and little water, Bill endured 2 long months in a Nazi prison camp before he was liberated by American forces and subsequently presented the Purple Heart he had earned when wounded months earlier. 8 short years after that, the same courage and sacrifice would be demonstrated by Purple Heart recipient Private First Class Alfred McRae. Serving with the 2nd Infantry Division, PFC McRae endured long days of fighting in the mountains of Korea. Writing in his journal on October 6, 1951, "We traveled all through the night in wilderness as thick as the jungle. It was the roughest yet. I don't know what keeps me going." 7 days later, with his unit engaged in a fierce firefight against Chinese forces, PFC McRae was firing from his foxhole when a grenade landed on his boot. Responding immediately, he jumped out of the foxhole, only to land on another grenade. The explosion threw him down the hill in front of him, and he then crawled, holding his wounded abdomen past wounded Chinese soldiers toward friendly lines until finally one of his comrades grabbed him and pulled him into a trench. PFC McRae would be treated for life-threatening injuries at a MASH unit in Korea before being evacuated to Tokyo and then back to the United States. A decade and a half later, after that, Army Staff Sergeant and Purple Heart recipient Perry Marcajani would continue this tradition of courage and sacrifice. In March of 1968, he and his comrades in the 75th Rangers were on a mission in Bon Song Plains, Vietnam, when they began taking enemy fire. They immediately sought cover in a nearby tree line. As Sergeant Marcajani reached for his weapon to return fire, however, a mine exploded, sending shrapnel into his knees, chest, hands, and face. Treated by his team's medic before being evacuated by helicopter to a field hospital, he was subsequently given a choice between being sent on convalescent leave or returning to his team. He chose to return to his unit. Finally, nearly 40 years after that, Private First Class James Martinez would carry the American tradition of courage and sacrifice forward yet again. Deployed to northern Iraq in 2004 with the 233rd Engineer Battalion of the Maine Army National Guard, PFC Martinez and his fellow soldiers were having breakfast in the mess tent at Forward Operating Base Merez when a suicide bomber blew himself up. Having been thrown backward by the impact of the explosion, PFC Martinez, despite a broken back, spent the rest of the day employing his civilian EMT skills to treat the scores of other troopers injured in this horrific attack. He is, by the way, now a Monticello resident and an EMT with the Fire Department of New York. And I'd like to ask each of these individuals to stand now so that we can recognize them. To the four stories of heroism and sacrifice I've just recounted could be added those of the more than 100 other Purple Heart recipients among us and the stories of the nearly 1.7 million other Americans who have earned the Purple Heart in combat. All of them are linked across generations by their membership in the Brotherhood of the Close Fight, a brotherhood which now, of course, includes many sisters as well. They form an unbroken chain of heroes who, generation after generation, have answered the call to serve. A long purple line characterized by courage, commitment, and sacrifice. All of them know personally and deeply the terrible grind of constant combat. They persevered through long, hard days of fighting, enduring crushing heat and withering cold. They suffered through the loss of their comrades in arms, the brothers and sisters alongside whom they'd fought day after day and night after night. And they experienced what it is to lie in pain in a foxhole, atop a ridge, along a city street, bruised, bleeding, or broken as a result of their service to our country. So to all those who have demonstrated the courage and made the sacrifice that the Purple Heart signifies, and to the families who supported them along the way, thank you. Thank you for what you did for our country as you earned the badge of honor that is sought by none, but is respected by all. On days like today, when we honor and remember the service, sacrifice, and courage that our troopers and their families have displayed throughout our nation's history, I'm often reminded of the response by the prophet Isaiah when the Lord asked, "Whom shall we send? Who will go for us?" "Here am I, Lord," Isaiah answered. "Send me." Send me. That has always been our troopers' response, not boastful, not cocky, never arrogant, fully aware of the difficulties that lie ahead. Send me, whatever the call, whether to plant the flag on the island of Iwo Jima, to fight through the hills of Korea, or to patrol through the jungles of Vietnam, whether to battle the Taliban in the mountains of Afghanistan, to fight insurgents in the cities of Iraq, or to confront extremists elsewhere in the world. Whatever the endeavor, whatever the mission, our troopers have always responded, "Send me." Our nation is incredibly blessed to have such heroes. So to all of you here who have raised your right hands and said, "Send me," when our nation called, and especially to those for whom that response resulted in terrible, sometimes life-changing wounds, I offer a heartfelt thank you. It has been the greatest of privileges to have served for the last 36 years with heroes like you, and it has been a great privilege to join the National Purple Heart Hall of Honor in my hometown community in thanking you and honoring you here today. Please know that your stories will never be forgotten, that you shall be, as George Washington said, forever revered by your fellow countrymen. Thank you very much.